Thank you so much, Brad, and thanks to everybody for being here tonight. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
You understand the southern accent all right?
Yep.
Good. I just want to start with a little story. Any refugees from California here? Yeah, quite a few. Okay, about half the room. Well, you might understand this. I was in Los Angeles a while back, and I love street food, so I go buy some street food from a vendor. And he gives me the change and says, you have an accent. Where are you from? I said, I'm from New Zealand. He said, well, where's that? So to make it really, really simple for him, I said, look, it's down near Australia. He said, where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from. So it explains why they vote like they do there, right? Now, people ask me all the time, they say, why as a New Zealander should I come to America? And I've probably spoken to 500 audiences around your beautiful country now. And I say there are two reasons. The first is gratitude. You know, my country was facing invasion during World War II by the Imperial Japanese Army. And if it hadn't been for the huge sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway, we would have been done, folks. There's still a very strong memory today. The second reason is related, but it's a little more selfish. Now, Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If freedom should ever fail here, if you ever lose your constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which took a huge trashing through the Obama years. Amen. Had that trend continued, folks, we'd soon be living in a world run out of Moscow and Beijing and Havana and Tehran. And is that the kind of world you'd like to hand to your children, folks? No. So anybody who cares about liberty has to care about America. Now, I want to say a couple of things about the 2016 election as we got the next one looming. Does anybody believe there may have been a touch of the miraculous about that election? I think even our atheist friends would have to acknowledge that one. You know, it shouldn't have happened, but it did. But that election did not save America. It gave America another chance, a reprieve, a second shot. Amen. And if you look at the Old Testament, there's a lot of times when the Israelites got a second chance. But if they ignored that second chance, how often did they get a third chance? Well, we're in our second chance, folks, and we got to use it. We got to take this opportunity. On a slightly more cynical note, the Germans have this wonderful phrase, Schadenfreude. It means to take pleasure in the pain of others. And it's not a very noble type of thing. It's not something you boast about. But I'm sure a lot of you stayed up on election night 2016, right up till, you know, that 2 o'clock in the morning when they panned the Democratic Party headquarters in New York. And when you saw those little snowflakes bawling their eyes out and hugging each other, did you feel just a little bit of Schadenfreude, folks? Maybe a whole lot. And after 8 years of Obama trashing your country, maybe, don't you think maybe you deserved it?
Absolutely.
Well, imagine what it's going to feel like on the night of November the 3rd, folks. Amen. It's not going to be pretty for the left, we hope. Now, it's going to be a bit of a hybrid talk tonight because I want to deal with China, I want to deal with Antifa. But first of all, I want to deal a little bit about the infiltration of the churches. Because, you know, Andrew Breitbart always used to say, he would say, you know, politics is downstream from culture. The culture of the country shapes your politics. But he could have added that culture is downstream from religion. So if your politics is a mess and your culture is a disaster, what is that telling you about your churches? Amen. Now, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, the standard model in the world, the standard model of government was the divine right of kings. God spoke to the king, and the king told you what to do. And it always happened to be that God usually agreed with the king. You know, it seemed to go together. Well, in 1776, America decided on a new model. And forget this idea that the American Revolution was fought over tea taxes or whatever. You had 13 colonies in this country, all run by different denominations. And they were people who had fled Europe to escape the state religions of Europe, so they could practice their religion according to their own conscience. And when those pastors, those black-robed regiments, when they saw King George coming for their religious liberty, they said, no way. And the black-robed regiments, with the Bible in one hand and the long rifle in the other, stood up and led that revolution, people. Completely led it. There were virtually every commander and precinct, you know, areas all across America. Most of the commanders were pastors. Can you imagine the pastors of today doing that? They wouldn't get out of their coffee shop, most of them. You know, you can't go fighting wearing skinny jeans, can you? It's not, you know. So, but anyway, so that's what happened. But finally, you know, your founding fathers had a new idea. Your rights didn't go. God didn't speak to the king and give the king your rights. God gave you your rights. Your rights came from God, and you had a government to protect those rights. Amen. And that new paradigm freed America. It gave you that certainty and that confidence to create great businesses, fantastic universities, schools, hospitals, churches, to make this the greatest country the world had ever known. Because your rights came from God, not the state, and nobody could take them from you but God. Amen. And that was what made America different. So, do you think this might have offended every dictator on the planet? You think, we don't want this crazy idea spreading. What if other people start thinking their rights come from God? What if they don't want to give us every second son for our army, every third daughter for our court? What if they don't want to keep giving us a quarter of their grain every year for their taxes? What if they don't believe that God is telling everybody what to do? Well, you had enemies of this republic from the day it was founded. Amen. Because they did not want this idea spreading. And the biggest enemies came in the 20th century, the disciples of Karl Marx, who took the old ideas of socialism that have been around for hundreds of years, gave it a scientific veneer, and updated it. And when you had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia with Lenin, 2,000 Bolsheviks took over the whole country, folks. They don't need many. You had a whole new assault on the values of your country. The very first communist front in America was the Methodist Committee for Social Action, because the communists understood they could never take America from the outside. They had to destroy America's backbone, and the backbone of America is Christianity. You don't have to be Christian to accept that, but that is just an historical reality. So, in the 1920s, the communists told all their members, if you were a Baptist when you grew up, go into the Baptist church. If you grew up Catholic, go back into the Catholic church. If you grew up Mennonite, go into the Mennonite churches. So you had all these thousands of communists all over America going back into the church they were brought up in, not to help Christianity, but to spread communist influence in the churches. And they basically wrecked most of the mainstream denominations. You know, by the 30s and 40s, by the 40s, you had most of the mainstream churches affiliated to the National Council of Churches, which was then affiliated to the World Council of Churches, which was run by the KGB. They used to call it the Communist Party at Prayer. So you had a massive infiltration of the mainstream churches. The Catholics thought they were safe, because what young communist is going to take a lifelong vow of celibacy to become a Catholic priest? Well, Bella Dodd, who was a Catholic who became a communist and went back to the faith, testified before Congress that she had put 1,100 young men into the Catholic priesthood. And as many of them were homosexual, they didn't really worry about the vow of celibacy. So you've got a twin problem in the Catholic Church today: Marxism and the pedophile plague that is basically has destroyed the Catholic Church almost. So all this was going on, and the churches were getting more and more left-wing all the time. But the one group that really stood strong and really didn't buy into this garbage, well, it's more two groups really. It was the evangelicals and the Baptists. They were very Bible believing, very traditional, and tended to be very conservative politically. But you think about this: if you are in the radical left and you've got control of Hollywood, you've got control of the Democratic Party, you've got control of the unions, you've got control of the universities and the media, and then these crazy Christians come out every few years and vote for someone like Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump, isn't that going to annoy you a little bit? You know, get set back 20 years. So they have made very, very concerted efforts in the last 10 years to take over the evangelical and Baptist churches. Now, how have they done this? See, the original, communists, they'd go into an Episcopalian church, and they basically preached 90% Marxism with about 10% Christianity, and people left. Well, now they do it much more subtly. It's more like 90% Christianity and 10% Marxism. But you'll know just a little bit of poison ruins the whole recipe, doesn't it? Yep. A little bit of poison destroys the whole thing. So, for instance, there's a few examples of this. One of the main organisations to foster this corruption is a group called the Gospel Coalition, led by a man called Tim Keller. Very widely respected Christian, has a big Presbyterian church in Manhattan. And last time I spoke in California to about 200 people, I get about 10 people coming up to me afterwards saying, "You don't really mean that about Tim Keller. I'm just reading his book. He's a wonderful man." And I don't come here to trash prominent Christians for a joke. No, look, I'm going to go back. Because before I go to Tim Keller, you need to know something else. Who's ever heard of the phrase situation ethics? Okay? Situation ethics. It is, whether you've heard of it or not, it's how most people make their ethical decisions in modern America. So what it was this. In the old days, ethics were basically determined by the 10 Commandments for most people. You might not have lived by them, but that was your reference point. You know, you understood that was the moral paradigm of this country. Well, Joseph Fletcher, one of the leading Protestant theologians of the 20th century in this country, wrote a book in 1966 called Situation Ethics. And his thesis was this: the Old Testament, that is cruel and vicious and old-fashioned. The new morality, the new Christian morality, must be guided by love alone. So you don't reference the Old Testament, you don't reference the 10 Commandments, you make a decision based on love, right? So theoretically this could mean, so your family's starving, you're out of work, so you go and do some shoplifting at the local supermarket. Well, that could theoretically be okay because you did it out of love. You didn't want your family to starve. You know, you have an adulterous affair because you don't really love your wife and you love this other woman, and you know, really this could be morally justified because it was done in a spirit of love. But the problem is, what is love is completely decided by the individual. And we all know how we can fool ourselves into all sorts of moral decisions if we wish to do so. So it basically gave carte blanche to do anything you liked as long as you could justify it in some way by invoking love. Every cowardly pastor in this country who doesn't tell the truth, who doesn't really preach the gospel,
who just preaches half the gospel because he doesn't want to drive his flock away, and you know, and half of them are Democrats, you don't want to upset them. Every cowardly pastor who takes that course is referencing situation ethics.
You know, he's abandoning the moral standard that we were given. And he's adopting his own moral standard and becomes the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. And you can see what a slippery slope that could be. And this came just at the time where that Marxist Dr. Spock was telling every American parent, don't spank your kids, don't discipline them, be their friend. And the Marxists from the Frankfurt School and Columbia University were talking about make love, not war, drop out, you know, just, you know, the whole counterculture sexual revolution of the 60s. It all came together in one big perfect storm. And it changed the morality of a nation. And not for the better, I would venture to say. Well, Joseph Fletcher, you look into his life. After he wrote his book, he abandoned the church, declared himself an atheist, and set up a group advocating for post-birth abortion for retarded children up to 10 years old. You'll be surprised to learn he was one of the key people who worked with Margaret Sanger to set up Planned Parenthood. He was active in several communist front groups in Kentucky and Ohio and Alabama in the late 1920s. When he was living in Massachusetts, I think he was the head of the Episcopalian Theological School at Harvard. He was actively involved with the Communist Party, several Stalinist World Front groups, and identified as a Communist Party member under oath. The guy was a complete Stalinist Marxist. But posing as a Christian, he transformed the ethics of a nation. One man sent America on a whole different moral paradigm. And we're still not recovered from it, folks.
It affects us every single day, all around us. Well, but getting back to Tim Keller. Tim Keller is really a situation ethics man. And he's a lot smarter than the old communists because he basically preaches 90% gospel and 10% Marxism. And his group has transformed the Bible colleges and the theology schools of this country. The Bible colleges of this country are where the universities were 20 years ago. They're halfway to Marxism, some of them are 80% the way to Marxism. It's all about social justice now. It's all about critical race theory. You'll go to a lot of churches, you'll never hear about sin or hell or any of that old stuff. You will hear a lot about fighting racism, welcoming illegal immigrants and refugees. You will hear a lot about ending global warming, ending racism, all this kind of stuff, critical race theory. They are transforming, completely transforming the religious basis of this country. And whether you care about religion or not, that's going to transform your society and your politics. This is going to move this country so far left, you will never recover. Never. And it's pretty well progressed, so that's why we're doing the movie. But I just want to discuss a little bit about what critical race theory is. Because you've ever heard that most of you here have white privilege. You all know that. You might be on food stamps, but you've got white privilege and you're oppressing the peoples of colour. Because the old Marxist paradigm was this. The workers who are oppressed by the capitalists would rise up and take their wealth and appropriate their wealth, and we'd all share it out and we'd live happily ever after in a classless society. Well, that does not work in a country like America, because you can start out dirt poor and end up pretty rich. You can start out pretty rich and end up dirt poor too, which is how it should be. Well, but race is always with you. So what if you're a communist and you want to destroy and divide this country? Are you going to put all your time into promoting class hatred, or are you going to go for race? What would you do? Race is more sensible, right? Well, the founder of what they call, see, the modern paradigm is this, critical race theory. If you're white, you have white privilege. You are part of the white Christian capitalist patriarchy, and you are oppressing the peoples of colour. You are racist whether you know it or not. You cannot avoid it, you're a racist. The only way to end racism is to overthrow the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. And this is Black Lives Matter to a T, folks. It is a pro-Chinese communist group we're talking here. They're not out about racial reconciliation. They're out here about destroying your country.
And so the father of critical race theory was a man called James Cone, Reverend James Cone, another Harvard guy, a black guy, and he came up with this whole theory. In 1982, he went to Cuba to work with several Soviet front religious groups, because the Soviets and Cubans had a lot of religious groups that they used to infiltrate Latin America and this country. And the man he took with him on that little adventure was a man called Jeremiah Wright. Anybody ever heard of Jeremiah Wright? Obama's pastor. Goddamn KKK America. That's who was part of all of this. Obama is a complete critical race theory guy. 100%. Does anybody think Obama improved race relations in this country? You know, now we've got all these courses, anti-racism courses in the churches. They're all going on about racism. This is the big deal. People, there's this very simple way to end racism. It's do unto others as you would have done unto you. End of story. Amen. Very simple. But I'll give you one example, two examples how this works. In our movie, we've got a little clip from 2015, and it's a evangelical class for conference for teenagers in the Midwest. And because it's the Midwest, most of these young kids are white, and their keynote speaker is a young black woman pastor from St. Louis, Missouri, Michelle Higgins. And she gets up and she tells them in no uncertain terms that the thing God wants them to do more than anything else is to end white privilege. And she goes on and on and on about this. And at the end of it, these kids are just thinking, wow, you know, this is the 11th commandment that got missed off somehow. I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to end white privilege. I'm not going to go to Nigeria on a mission. I'm going to stay here in America and end white privilege. Well, they didn't tell these kids that Michelle Higgins was a member of the Organization for Black Struggle, a front for the pro-Chinese Communist Party group, Liberation Road, the people who burnt Ferguson, Missouri to the ground. They were being taught complete Marxism, 100% Marxism, thinking it's Christianity. Another example. There's a friend of mine who was at Southeastern Baptist, tells me about this. His friend experienced this. There's a little church in North Carolina. A mixed church, a lot of black parishioners, a lot of white parishioners. And they got a new pastor from Southeastern. And he was all fired up with critical race theory. And he noticed that there were two families in the church with the same surname. One black family, one white family. So logically, the white family must have once enslaved the black family, right? How could you draw any other conclusion? So he demanded that the white family apologize to the black family for this sin of racism. And the white family says, well, we've never held slaves. And anyway, we're Christian and we believe in personal sin, not the sins of somebody 100 years ago. Take a hike, pastor. And the pastor insisted, and he kept at it, and that church no longer exists. This is the consequence of critical race theory, the social justice, all the garbage that is now in churches all over America. All over America, and you've got thousands of people every year who decide they want to become Christians. They go to a church, they get told all about critical race theory, all about social justice, and they think this is Christianity. They have no other reference. None at all. So, if we don't address that problem, we lose this country eventually. Because we lose the religious backbone of this country, we lose everything that's good about this country. And that's just a matter of time.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the composition of your Congress. And I'm going to give you both barrels tonight, folks. I'm a bit fired up tonight. Now, has anybody in this room ever had to undergo an FBI background check or security clearance for a government position? Okay, so 4 or 5 people. Okay. Is it true those background checks are pretty darn rigorous?
Yes.
They go through your family background, overseas travel, criminal convictions. They go and interview your pastor, they interview your friends. That's all true, isn't it? That's what they do.
Not my pastor, but my neighbors.
Okay, your neighbours. So they really check you out.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you passed, sir.
I mean, pardon?
I'm assuming you passed.
I did.
Good.
Despite my neighbors.
Yeah, despite your neighbours, yeah. Well, congratulations. Because one traitor can cost you a war, folks. You know, you imagine had Benedict Arnold been successful during the revolution, how different your history may have been. But what if you're a young Marxist radical who hangs around with the local Communist Party? Someone like Kirsten Sinema, someone like Raul Grijalva, someone like Ruben Gahayo. And you get elected to Congress where you may serve on the Homeland Security Committee, or the Armed Services Committee, or the Intelligence Committee. How much of an FBI background check do you need for that one, folks? Nothing. 0. Because the people are supposed to vet the candidates, right? And the media is supposed to help you do it, right? Well, how's that been working out? Do you think the Iranians know about this? Or the Chinese? Or the Cubans? Do you think they might know there's no background checks for any of your congressional chairmanships or committee positions? None at all? Well, but don't worry, because there's no way communists or socialists or radicals or Muslim radicals could ever get into your Congress, because you have an organisation called the FBI to stop them. You saw how tough they were on Hillary Clinton, right? They put your national security way ahead of their jobs and pensions, right? No. Do you think they're going to go after the person who may be the president, who could shut them down, get them fired? So think about it. The FBI and the Justice Department are overseen by the Judiciary Committee, most powerful committee in your Congress. Now, who remembers John Conyers from Michigan? He was in Congress 140, 160 years approximately. One of the most treasonous congressmen ever served. For 40 years he headed the Judiciary Committee. He was the man who abolished the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was the man who defended the Muslim Brotherhood in your Congress when some of your I've got it in my movie saying this. No, we shouldn't go after the Muslim Brotherhood. These are the people who founded Al-Qaeda, ISIS and Hamas. No, because they're a peaceful social service agency now. We should work with them, not against them. John Conyers had a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40-year history with Democratic Socialists of America, 30 years with the Workers' World Party, which supports North Korea and Cuba and Iran, and as I said, a big Muslim Brotherhood supporter. John Conyers was a hardcore anti-American Marxist-Leninist, as hardcore as you can get, folks. Yet for 40 years, he oversaw the FBI and the Justice Department.
Also on the Judiciary Committee until recently was a woman called Judy Chu from California, a long-time supporter of the Communist Workers' Party, a pro-Chinese group. And you should see Judy Chu. You look her up on C-SPAN. Whenever the FBI had the temerity to arrest one of the more than 25,000 Chinese spies currently working in this country, Judy Chu would go, "You are racists. The FBI is a racist organisation." And she arranged for sensitivity training for these cruel FBI agents so they wouldn't go after these poor Chinese spies any longer. And now the head of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jerry Nadler, the man who tried to impeach your president. Well, Sean Hannity's been a little bit upset because you've got a socialist in Congress now, Ocasio-Cortez. She's a member of Democratic Socialists of America, which is actually worse than the Communist Party USA. And Sean's rightly upset about this. How could this happen? Well, Jerry Nadler, the head of the Judiciary Committee, the man who tried to impeach your president, has been an active member or supporter of Democratic Socialists of America since at least 1977, people. He is a Marxist, yet he oversees the FBI and the Justice Department. The FBI is out there now trying to arrest Black Lives Matter protesters and vandals and arsonists who are Jerry Nadler's political friends. How do you think that's going to go? Why are the leaders not getting arrested? But so the FBI, they decide, well, we're going to grow a spine. We're going to go to the Judiciary Committee. We're going to say, I'll give you one more example because this is quite chilling. He's in here, Andre Carson from Indiana, one of your 3 Muslim members of Congress. He gets up in front of a big Muslim Brotherhood front group conference in Connecticut in 2012. He says, hey, I've been told there's some people here today spying on us, people undercover checking us out, because these people think we are here plotting to destroy this country. Well, I say to you people undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us. This man currently serves on the Intelligence Committee overseeing the CIA, the NSA, the DEA, you name it. There's at least 100 members of your House, including 3 from this state, and 25 members of the US Senate, including 1 from this state, who couldn't pass a background check to drive a school bus. Yet they're running every committee in your Congress and have huge influence in your US Senate. Talk about the deep state, folks. That's what the deep state is. It is communist. And so one of them, so the FBI thinks, well, look, we've had enough of this. We know all these people are working for Iran, a whole bunch are working for Cuba, for China, a whole bunch of them are secret communists or Muslim Brotherhood supporters. We've got to do something. We've got to go to the Judiciary Committee and get permission to investigate these people. Mr. Nadler, Mrs. Chu, do you mind if we investigate about 100 of your colleagues? Is that all right? And by the way, Mr. Nadler and Mrs. Chu, you're both on the list. Is that okay? How do you think that's going to go? So you get elected to Congress like Raul Grijalva or Kirsten Sinema. There's no media scrutiny, there's no background checks, and the FBI doesn't dare to touch you. That's the problem. That is why you're so deeply infiltrated.
Now I'll talk a little bit about Uncle Joe Biden. Isn't it great that we've got a moderate Democrat at the top of the ticket now? Isn't that great? We've got an old-fashioned moderate Democrat. It's almost like we've got Harry Truman or JFK standing, right? Well, that's what the New York Times tells us and the Washington Post tells us. Well, go back a little bit. Joe Biden in 1972 was a 29-year-old city councillor in Delaware, and he decided to run against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating. You'd think that would be a suicide mission, right? But he won. And he won because he had the backing of a very influential group, it's all in here, called the Council for a Livable World. They've now elected over 200 senators and over 250 Congress members. But you've never heard of them. Now, the Council for a Livable World was set up by a man called Leo Szilard. He was a Hungarian. He was an atomic weapons scientist. He was a top man in your Manhattan Project that gave you the atomic bomb which you used to beat Japan. And the head of security, Leslie Groves, was always trying to fire Leo Szilard because he knew he was a Hungarian communist. But he couldn't because he was just too darn valuable. Well, in 1962, Szilard sets up the Council for a Livable World. And the premise was very simple. In a small state, it doesn't cost much to elect a senator. And a senator has huge power. So if you want a lot of power and influence, you can get it by electing left-wing senators in small states like Rhode Island or Vermont or Delaware. So that's what they did. Now, 1972, when Joe Biden was running, he was picked up by a man called Albert Gore Sr. You may have heard of his son. He invented the internet and global warming. You know the guy? Okay. So Albert Gore Sr. was a senator from Tennessee, like his son, and at the time he was the president of the Council for a Livable World. And he got all the money for Joe. He loved Joe, got a whole bunch of volunteers, the power of the Democratic Party, gave him a whole bunch of media attention, and he got him elected. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was a protege of a man called Armand Hammer. Some of you may have heard of Armand Hammer, the leading American Soviet agent of the early 20th century, the man who kept the Bolshevik Revolution alive. Joe Biden owes his job to two Marxist KGB agents. Because, Leo Szilard was also revealed to have been a KGB officer as well. So what was the deal? The deal was, we will get you elected, we will fund you, we will keep getting you elected. All you got to do is gut the United States military. You're going to vote against weapon systems, denuclearize America, negotiate horrible treaties with the Soviet Union that give Moscow a big advantage. And that's what Joe Biden did. Did more damage to your military than anybody you could possibly imagine. I've got him again in tape. I've got him at the 50th anniversary of the Council for a Livable World. Joe Biden gets up and says, "Thank you, Council. You got me elected. You've been with me for 50 years. You were with me when I was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You helped me and Obama negotiate the START treaty with Russia, the treaty that was so bad for America that Trump had to unilaterally cancel it." Joe Biden has worked for Moscow and Beijing and Iran his entire political career. He'd be one of the biggest traitors to ever serve in the US Senate. And he's the moderate Democrat. Look, people, in my book, I profiled 10 people who stood for the presidency this year, who are still running this year. All of them were Marxists. And that includes sweet, nice Amy Klobuchar, Mrs. Nice from Minnesota, whose father used to take her on bicycle tours of the Soviet Union, who used to work heavily with Democratic Socialists of America for many, many years. Sweet little Pete Buttigieg, whose father was one of the leading communist theoreticians on the planet and who also worked with Democratic Socialists of America. That's Pete did, not his father. They were all Marxists. Julian Castro, Cory Booker, all of them Marxists. Now let's talk a little bit about Auntie Kamala, because according to the Washington Post, she is a moderate Democrat, even though her voting record is to the left of both Hillary Clinton, both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But she's a moderate Democrat. Well, her mother and father, her father was a Jamaican economist, her mother was an Indian cancer researcher. Her father was an openly Marxist professor at Stanford. The mother and father were both members of the Afro-American Association in Oakland in the early 60s. Two members of that, they supported Castro, Che Guevara, Mao Zedong. Two members of that group split off, Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, I think. They split off and they formed the Black Panther Party, the Maoist, communist, pro-Chinese Black Panther Party. So Kamala goes to Howard University, where she's a student radical. She goes back to San Francisco, where she goes into politics. Now, a lot of people have talked about her affair with Willie Brown, who was the mayor of San Francisco for some time, a very high-ranking Democrat. He was 60, she was 30. It was a little bit of a scandal at the time. He gave her a couple of jobs where she was making $400,000 over 5 years for sort of one meeting a month, you know, that kind of thing. But nobody talks about the fact that Willie Brown was a communist. He was very actively involved with the Communist Party for many, many years. He was still sponsoring Communist Party events well after his affair with Kamala, and now he's Communist China's best friend in the Bay Area, along with Dianne Feinstein. complete communist. Then she gets elected to the DA in San Francisco, California Attorney General, then US Senate. All of them were with the backing of a man called Steve Phillips. Steve Phillips was a Maoist communist at Stanford, member of the League of Revolutionary Struggle. Now he left Stanford, he married very well. He married a young woman called Susan Sandler, who was an heiress to the Golden West savings and loan fortune. You know, they were full of subprime mortgages. They sold out to Wachovia. That bankrupted Wachovia, who then had to go on with Wells Fargo. But anyway, they got $2.2 billion profit, and they put half of it into the progressive movement and the Democratic Party. And Steve Phillips used that money to buy himself access to the top levels of the Democratic Party. He also worked with George Soros and Tom Steyer and others to set up the Democracy Alliance, which is about 150 left-wing billionaires who fund left-wing candidates and the Democratic Party all over the country. But anyway, in 2008, Steve Phillips got about $10 million together and did big voter registration drives in about 15 southern states, mainly states with big Latino and black populations. And that voter registration drive is what got his very good friend Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton. Steve Phillips knows the Harris family very well. Kamala Harris's sister Maya was a student radical with Steve Phillips at Stanford. He got her elected to the Attorney General, he got to the DA, got her elected to Attorney General, got her elected to California Senate, and now he's trying to get her elected to the US, to the Vice Presidency. And by the way, her husband Doug Emhoff as well is well known that his law firm deals almost exclusively with the Chinese Communist Party. Kamala Harris, like Donald Trump said recently, he said, if Joe Biden's elected, he will sell this country to China. Well, Joe Biden couldn't have picked a better running mate to help him do that. She is completely in the communist Chinese camp, 100%. Now, so, you know, Donald Trump Jr. said last year, he said the next election will be communism versus freedom. Well, he got a little bit of pushback from that, but from what I've said tonight, and I don't expect you to believe me, but can you see that might actually be on the cards? Now, I just want to go a little bit now into the two major ways the Communist Party of China is at war with your nation right now. And they are at war with you, folks. You're in World War III now. You may not know it, but you are. In May 2019, President Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods. Very long overdue, and good on him for doing it. But the response of the Chinese Communist Party through the Xinhua news agency was to declare people's war on America. So what does people's war mean? People's war is every form of warfare short of direct military confrontation. It means flooding your enemy with counterfeit money, counterfeit money. It means espionage, spying, stealing technology. It means flooding America with fentanyl to kill your children. All of these things are Chinese people's war. But it also means biological warfare, and it also means rioting. So we started to hear about the Wuhan virus in January, maybe a little bit before that. And we know it was almost certainly genetically engineered. And I thought initially it was probably an accidental release. Well, I don't think so now. Because we know it was deliberately spread. There's no question about that. Because every January in Wuhan, they have a big week-long Chinese New Year celebration. It's like Mardi Gras. It's just a big party. And this year, the Chinese Communist Party was asked by Wuhan authorities, do we continue the celebrations this year? We don't want to spread the disease. The Communist Party said, have the party. So You know, people came from Arizona, they came from Canada, they came from Britain, Hong Kong, from all over the world to party up in Wuhan for a whole week. Then they went back to where they come from, and voila, COVID's everywhere. Everywhere. So, on April 2nd, the Chinese Communist Party International Department issued a letter signed by 230 world communist parties, including Communist Party USA. And there are 4 messages in this letter. These letters are how the Communist Party of China spreads its line around the world. This is every party supposed to echo the same talking points. So it looks like it's a mass thing. There were 4 points. The first one was, you can't blame China for the virus. If you do, you're a racist. Second one, China's our friend. China's leading the world in combating the virus. We should be so grateful. The third point, China can do this because it has a wonderful socialised healthcare system. Look at the mess they're making in America. Fourth point, blame Trump, and blame Trump a whole bunch more. Have you heard any of these points? Look, Tucker Carlson had Brian Dean Wright on his show not long ago, former CIA officer and a Democrat. He said, Tucker, I'm embarrassed. My party is following the Chinese line over COVID. They're calling for shutdown, shutdown, shutdown. And Tucker said, why? Well, some of them are useful idiots, he said, but I've got to believe many of them are paid Chinese agents, like Dianne Feinstein possibly, like Adam Schiff almost certainly, like Judy Chu almost certainly. But anyway, the Chinese line is this. Every other epidemic we've ever had, the standard response has been you quarantine the sick and everybody else goes out and does their stuff, right? Typhoid, diphtheria, polio, that's how we always did it. But we couldn't do it this time because the World Health Organization told us that there was evidence of asymptomatic transmission. Many people without symptoms were transmitting, so we couldn't wait. We had to shut everything down or millions would die. Well, we've got to understand the World Health Organization is run by Mr. Tedros of Ethiopia. And if you look at his CV, he's a leader of that country's Marxist, Leninist, Maoist Communist Party. He loves China like a chocolate, folks. Completely in their pocket. So the Democrats have bought into this, and the Chinese have bought into this because they have a common enemy. That enemy is your president. You know, President Trump caned the Chinese on trade. He supported the Hong Kong protesters. He supported the anti-communist candidate in the Taiwanese presidential elections against the communist Chinese candidate, and the good woman won. The Communist Party was losing face. And if you lose face in China, you lose power not long after. They couldn't handle 4 more years of this crazy guy because they would get done like Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, only they would be hung from lampposts in China. So they knew they had to destroy Trump before Trump destroyed them. So they unleashed this people's war on us. But the reason is this, the Democrats love it, shutting everything down, because the worse the economy gets, the better their chances are. And the Chinese love it because it means Trump might not get re-elected. And they'll have Joe Biden to deal with, or Kamala Harris. So it's a win-win. But there's an even more sinister reason. President Obama did more damage to the US military than any army could hope to achieve. He gutted weapon systems, horrible rules of engagement in Afghanistan and Iraq, transgender policy to lower morale, pushing women in combat, all this kind of stuff. All of it. Appointing political generals, firing the good generals. You know, he was reducing some of your military down to World War II, even World War I levels. The Chinese were building 60 ships a year under Obama, you were building 9. You know, the Soviets have 6,000 to 20,000 nukes. America hasn't built a new one since 1992, and the shelf life is 20 years. When Trump got into power, he understood that this country was facing war, and you might not win it. So he got rid of, he started rebuilding the military, upping the budget, getting rid of the horrible rules of engagement, all of the good stuff. But you can only do that on the back of a strong economy. What do you do when your economy's in the toilet? And already 31 Democrats, led by the pro-Chinese communist Barbara Lee from the Bay Area and the pro-Latin American terrorist Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, have written a letter to the Armed Services Committee demanding huge defence budget cuts in the next budget go-round. If they are successful, people, Russia and China and Iran rule this planet. This is a military operation against President Trump and the US military budget. That's what it's all about. This is survival of your country at stake, folks. And Democrats all over this country are trying to get you shut down, destroy your country, because they just hate Trump so much. They'll sell their own kids into slavery and destruction to destroy this president. So we're just starting to recover from that, and we get hit with 5 weeks of riots. You know, week after week of riots. So this is all because George Floyd got killed in Minneapolis, right? No. This was planned since 2016. This was always going to happen in election year. They were just waiting for a trigger. They knew somewhere some black guy was going to get killed by cops sometime this year. About 1,000 people get killed by police every year. That must mean probably 150 to 200 black people. You know you're going to get a case. They were primed, ready to go. And this was all sparked by a group called Freedom Road Socialist Organization in Minneapolis, a pro-Chinese Communist Party. They've got a branch in Tucson, Salt Lake City, Tampa, Tallahassee, Miami, Dallas, Houston, and they spread those riots all over the country. Completely a Chinese communist operation. And it was always meant to be violent. I've just released a video. I found a podcast by the woman who sparked this. Her name is Jess Sundin. And she organised all the riots in Minneapolis. And she talks openly. You cannot believe the joy we felt when Precinct 3 was burnt to the ground. We support completely the violence. The looting and the arson was 100% part of our movement. These are her words, folks. This was not peaceful protest hijacked by Antifa. This was always intended to be violent. The leader of Freedom Road, Steph Yorick, the wife of Jess Sundin, said on the day that Trump got inaugurated, our mission is to be in the streets for 4 years to make this country ungovernable, to destroy this president. And the people, and if it wasn't Freedom Road, the other people who were burning your country was another pro-Chinese communist group called Liberation Road. They are the people who gave you Black Lives Matter and the people who burned Ferguson, Missouri to the ground in 2014. Especially the black businesses, because you can't have prosperous black people because that would destroy the narrative of oppression. So that this is a 100% Chinese operation, folks. The Chinese are burning your cities. The Chinese are also working on mass voter registration drives in Virginia, which they've flipped, in North Carolina, which they're on the way to flipping, in Florida, which they're not far away from doing, and Arizona, which is why you have Kyrsten Sinema in the position she is, and could very well have Mark, what's his name, you know, as your senator in a few weeks' time. Mark, I never remember. Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, yeah. So they are working, the Chinese are working in your elections, they're burning your cities, and they're wrecking your economy. And they're killing your kids with fentanyl. But the good news is this, you can buy cheap toasters at Walmart. Okay? You've been sold out by Kissinger and all his friends and all these big businessmen in this country who are making mega bucks off trading with China. They've gutted your industry. They've bought up your politicians. They've taken your jobs. They're poisoning your kids. They're burning your cities. They'll build a military as big and almost as getting to be as big as yours. Also, you can buy cheap toasters at Walmart. What a deal. And President Trump, when he gets re-elected, he has got a plan to do to the Communist Party of China, which is only 800 families, people, to do to them what Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And you imagine what a liberated China would do for this world? What a boon a real free China could be for this world? All that energy, all that culture, all that enterprise in the service of good rather than evil. That's one reason we've got to elect Trump, folks, because he will do that. He will transform this planet, and he wants to do it. But we've got to give him that mandate. So we've got all this going on, folks, and I've painted a pretty bleak picture here. You know, I always hate it when somebody walks out now, because I think, what are they going to do, you know? Yeah. But yeah, well, that'd be pretty mild. But look, if I thought there's no hope for this amazing country, I'd be back in my beautiful New Zealand right now, building bunkers and stocking up on baked beans. But I think there's huge hope for this country. You know, President Trump gets re-elected, folks. 4 more years of taxes coming down. The border wall gets built. 4 more years of deregulation. You're already energy independent, which is absolutely huge. The military gets built up. People, you think, did anybody notice the difference between the Obama economy and the Trump economy? A little bit? A little bit. Okay. Well, when Trump got elected, the checkbooks came open, because not a lot of people were going to build big businesses under Obama. And you saw a big increase in employment, a big increase in manufacturing. Everything was going in the right direction. Well, right now, a lot of business people are sitting on their checkbooks again. They think, what if Joe Biden gets elected? What if we get a Green New Deal? What if we get all this stuff, you know? Am I really going to put $100,000 down on a new piece of machinery or $1 billion into a new factory? Well, President Trump gets re-elected, folks. You're going to see investment come into this country like you've never seen. You're going to see the checkbooks come open, not just from here, but overseas. Now you think of the American worker. The American worker is going to be sitting there with job offers all around, with a border wall sealed so they're not competing with cheap illegal labour. The American worker is going to be on the pig's back. You're going to see wages and salaries go through the roof. You're going to see a general increase in prosperity like you've never seen before. The taxes are going to keep coming down. All of the good things are going to happen. Look, people, we can do things in the next term of office. I'm sure we could push President Trump to do great things. What about abolishing the Department of Education, for instance? Okay? So you can educate your children in Arizona values, not Washington, D.C. socialist values. You know, President Trump's already taken this country out of 2 United Nations bodies. Well, let's push President Trump to take America out of the UN, period, folks. Yeah. Wouldn't that be a boon for this country? All of these things that conservatives have been fighting for years are now within your grasp. You know, I understand. You know, President Trump has put more conservative justices into the courts of this nation than any other president by a country mile. Well, now he's got an opportunity, folks, because for 60 years, the left have controlled the Supreme Court, and they've put these horrible decisions in. They call them precedent. They pile another one on top of that. Now, 60% of what your federal government does is completely unconstitutional. Well, now, thanks to you and Trump, you have a 5-4 majority. And I know that Roberts is a horrible flake, but now, thanks to the good graces of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you have an opportunity for a 6-3 majority, folks. What is that going to do for your religious liberties, your Second Amendment rights, your business regulations, your education policies? All the things conservatives and Christians have been fighting for decades are now on the table. And do you think Trump wants to stick it to the left a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
You think he wants to leave a great legacy to this country? To be regarded as the greatest president for freedom since George Washington? He's got a little bit of an ego, folks. Well, I'm okay with that if he's doing the right stuff. Let's just encourage him, people. You imagine Trump with the House back, the Senate with an increased majority, so he doesn't have to put up with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, and a very, very friendly Supreme Court. He would be unleashed, people. You would see things coming out of the White House and out of Congress and the Senate like we could only dream of. Think I'm exaggerating, folks?
Nope.
It's all there for the taking, people. Everything we've worked for, it's finally there for the taking. So we get a big choice. We can blow this God-given opportunity and regret it for the rest of our lives, or we can seize it with both hands. Yeah. I can't promise you what's going to happen in this election, folks, but I can promise you two things. If you give it everything that's within you for your God, your country, and your children, you put everything you can into winning this race, two things may happen. One, we may give it everything we've got, and maybe we still lose. But at least you will earn your right to look your children in the eye and say, I did everything I possibly could for you. Amen. What is that worth to you, folks? And if you win, and you absolutely can win this, that 2016 election convinced me that God is not finished with this country yet, folks. Amen. You win this one, you'll spark an economic boom like you've never seen before. You'll spark a liberty boom, not just in this country, but all over the world. And you will give your children, the opportunity to live in not just the amazing country that you inherited, but one even greater. Is that worth fighting for? Yeah. So I want to say to you folks, thank you so much for what you do for America, for my country, and for liberty. God bless America, and God bless Arizona, and God bless you all. Thank you very much. Is there any time for questions, Brad? Have I gone on too long?
No. Do we have some questions? Anybody
I'll
want
just take two or three. I know some people have got to go.
Have a seat. We'll do 2 or 3 questions. This is
Chris's son was listed on the Communist Party on their website.
Yeah, they came from me. Yeah, they came from me. Found it in the LA Public Library archives.
So anybody who questions it, it's right there.
It's right there, and I've put it out many times, and even conservatives won't pick it up and use it. But Christensen and Kirstensen, they were still supporting it in this election cycle, last election cycle. They got her elected. Communist Party USA, same people who are elected, Raul Grijalva, and the guy who was in Ed Pastor, Ruben Gallegos, same people elected, you know. They're all communists. The gentleman over the back.
The lineage of Black Lives Matter you mentioned just briefly, and I was curious about that. So, do you have any more information?
Okay. Well, it's founded by what we're told. It's founded by Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, and Patrice Kaluas. And these are 3 black chicks who are sort of sitting around and are just horrified that, you know, Trayvon Martin had been killed in Florida, and they're just, you know, the policemen are obviously going out hunting black kids for sport. So they just set up this, they just dreamed up this hashtag, and it just sort of went viral, right? And just became a movement, and it just was so surprising to them. These 3 women were complete Marxists. It was a complete scam. They set this up, it was planned for a very long time. They were all affiliated with Liberation Road, the pro-Chinese Communist Party. They have heavy connections to Palestinian terrorists. They have connections directly to the Communist Party of China, and even to an organisation set up by former East German communists. You know, the Berlin Wall people? They The Movement for Black Lives, which is the umbrella group for all of these groups, is run by Liberation Road, pro-Chinese Communist Party. They've shaken down multiple big businesses to get funds. They're extorting people. They've got their stuff into schools. They've got Republicans taking a knee to them. But it is a communist Chinese operation.
We were just talking that the day after something like this happens, like Trayvon, Obama got on TV and said, today we're all Trayvon. Before the facts are known, George Floyd, same thing. Before the facts are known, the narrative is everywhere.
Look, because they network. It's all primed, ready to go. If it hadn't been Trayvon Martin, it would have been Fred Smith in Georgia the next week or whoever. They just wait for the spark. And if they can't, look, the latest George Floyd thing, they tried to start it with the jogging case in Atlanta, you know, the jogger in Atlanta, who wasn't a jogger, he was a burglar, but never mind. They tried to start it when a young woman was killed by the police in Kentucky. You know, which they just rioted about that when the cops were acquitted just the other night. It was all planned for election year. You know, I'll give you a little example how this works. You know, Rosa Parks, right? You know, Rosa Parks was just this young lady and she was just so tired and she sat on the back of it. She sat going home from work on the bus and she couldn't be bothered going down the back of the bus because she was so tired. So she sat up the front and she got arrested, and that sparked the civil rights movement. Well, yes, the civil rights movement was necessary, but it was run by the Communist Party USA. Rosa Parks had trained at a Communist Party school, and it was the 5th time she'd tried to get arrested. Every other time, she just sat on the front of the bus and people just ignored her. But she finally found some idiot who wanted to make an issue of it, and they used that to spark the whole movement. And see, when communists, my great friend Marv Traeger, who used to be the head of the California Communist Party Youth, and now he's a conservative Buddhist living in Prescott, working for the Republican Party. But anyway, he said, look, when the communists are out of power, sometimes they do something useful, like the civil rights movement. But it was a communist operation, and Rosa Parks was a communist agent. But this is how they do it. This is I just was so tired. I just couldn't go down the back of the bus. No, it was your 5th time you tried to get arrested. It was all planned, and that's exactly how it was with Black Lives Matter, exactly how it was with Trayvon Martin. They call it stunts. You know, you see all the time, you hear all these racist things. There's racist graffiti at a university. Somebody's scored anti-gay stuff on a student dorm or something. It's always the communists who do it themselves. Another example, back in the 50s, they were trying to desegregate housing in Louisville, Kentucky, because you had black housing, you had white areas, and you weren't allowed to swap over. Well, the leftists finally got a black couple into a white area. They bought a house in a white area. And guess what? The house got burned down. So they made a big incident about this. This is horrible racism. Well, eventually the cops found that the head of the local Communist Party was the person who burned the house down. You know, this is the kind of game they play. Just all lies, it's all planned, it's all, you know.
So it's false flag operation.
False flag operation, exactly, that's exactly what it is. They've been doing this for 100 years.
Yeah.
And they're pretty darn good at it. Maybe one more question? Mark.
I'm going to vote with Donald Trump, but I always emphasize we need to vote the whole Republican ticket.
Yeah.
For everybody on the ticket on the Republican ticket.
Yeah.
Even though you may not like them, it's better than voting for any Democrat.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, Mark. See, most elections are all about your primary out the rhinos, you get a good conservative in. Well, this is one election, I would vote for Donald Duck if they had an R after their name. Because this is a referendum on Trump, on Trump's agenda. And he needs the House, and he needs the state legislatures, and he needs the Senate. I don't like Susan Collins. I think she's an idiot. But if I was in Maine, I'd be voting for Susan Collins. I don't like Corey Gardner. He's in Colorado. But if I was in Colorado, I'd be voting for Cory Gardner. And no, I'm not a huge fan of Martha McSally either. But I'll tell you what, I'd be voting for her in a heartbeat this election cycle.
That's a problem we have here.
Sorry?
That's a problem we have here.
Yeah, well, you have it in every state, sir.
Yeah.
You know, look. See, Ann Coulter says it very well. She says there are plenty of bad Republicans, but now there are no good Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, the Democratic Party is now a communist party. You know, and I know a lot of bad Republicans, but all that's holding this country together right now is President Trump and a few senators and a few congressmen. But they need all the other losers with them to actually have the numbers to get the stuff through.
The lesser of two evils.
The lesser of two evils. But you know, look, people say that's not a principled stand. To me, the highest principle is the preservation of the republic. Now, what does that take right now? Nothing is more important than that right now. One more question, sir. Yeah.
When they make committee assignments, they go by numbers, not how good they Republicans.
Well, that's right. We need the chairmanship of those committees.
We've had a taste of the
Yeah.
chairman in the House.
Look, when Reagan got into power, most of the Republican Party hated Reagan. Reagan was banned in 1976 from Ohio by the Ohio Republican Party because they thought he was this crazy right-wing extremist. They hold Reagan dinners all the time now, but at the time they thought he was an idiot. But once he got in and he started to have a few wins, the go-alongs to get-alongs went along with him. You know, and they had plenty of idiots in the Republican Party back then, but look what Reagan could achieve. Well, you know, not all the Republican Party are great, but they got a great leader right now, and they got some good senators, and you know, we can set this up for a long time. You know, imagine say in 2032 you have Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens standing on the ticket. You know, maybe Donald Trump Jr. in 2038. Who knows? But we got to get through this crisis to set it up for the future. But God is on our side, folks. I don't think God helped us elect Donald Trump for a joke. I think he gave it to us as another shot to save this country, and if we seize it by both hands, I think this country will be blessed for a very long time into the future. That's what motivates me. So please come and see me at the table. Real honour to talk to you folks. Went on a bit long tonight. I love the sound of my own voice, but I just hope you found something interesting in it.